In the early 1930s, the American West stood on the edge of destruction. The Colorado River was a wild beast. It flooded farms in spring. It dried up in summer. The people who lived there had no control over it. They lived in fear. The story of the Hoover Dam is a story of survival. It is a story of men fighting nature to save a region. The problem started long before the 1930s. For decades, the Colorado River was a problem for the Southwest. The river ran from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California. It was unpredictable. In 1905, the river broke its banks. It flooded the Salton Sink in California. It created the Salton Sea. This disaster showed the power of the water. It destroyed valuable farmland. The people in the Imperial Valley were terrified. They knew it would happen again. The demand for water grew quickly. Cities like Los Angeles grew fast. Farmers in California and Arizona needed water for crops. But the river did not care. When the snow melted in the mountains, the river became a raging torrent. It washed away bridges and homes. In the dry summer months, the river shrank to a trickle. Crops died in the fields. The economy of the West was fragile. It relied on this wild water. Without a solution, the growth of the American West would stop.
Then came the Great Depression. The stock market crashed in October 1929. The economy collapsed. Banks closed. Businesses failed. Millions of people lost their jobs. Men stood in long lines for bread. Hope was lost. The country was desperate. In this dark time, a plan emerged. It was a massive project. It was a plan to build the largest dam in the world. It would tame the Colorado River. It would provide jobs. It would bring water and power to the Southwest. Herbert Hoover was the president when the project began. He was an engineer by trade. He understood the river. He had worked on the Colorado River problem for years. In 1922, he organized a meeting. The states of the Colorado River Basin met in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They signed the Colorado River Compact. This agreement divided the water between the upper basin and the lower basin. It was a difficult negotiation. The states argued over water rights, but Hoover pushed them to agree. This was the first step. The government passed the Boulder Canyon Project Act in 1928. This law approved the building of the dam. The location was a difficult choice. The initial plan was for Boulder Canyon, but geologists found a better spot. It was Black Canyon. The walls of Black Canyon were steep. The rock was hard volcanic rock. It was a perfect place to hold back a massive amount of water. The site was about 30 miles southeast of Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas was a small railroad town then. It had a few hundred people. It was a lonely place in the desert. The contract to build the dam was a huge prize. It was worth millions of dollars. In 1931, the government opened the bids. 6 construction companies joined together. They called themselves 6 Companies, Inc. This group included Utah Construction Company, Morrison Knudsen, and others. They were risk takers. They bid about $48.8 million. It was a massive amount of money at the time. The government accepted the bid. The race began. The contract had a strict deadline. The companies had to finish the project in 7 years. If they were late, they would pay a heavy fine. Frank Crowe was the chief engineer. He worked for 6 companies. He was known as Hurry Up Crowe. He was a genius at construction. He wanted to finish the dam fast. He did not like delays. He had worked on dams before. He knew the challenges. He looked at the black walls of the canyon. He saw the river below. He had a plan, but he needed men. The news spread across the country. There were jobs in Nevada. Men were desperate. They packed their cars. They took their families. They drove to the desert. Thousands of men arrived in Las Vegas. They hoped for work. The summer of 1931 was brutal. The temperature in Black Canyon reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It was unbearable. The heat killed men.
The first challenge was the river. The workers could not build the dam while the river flowed through the canyon.
They had to move the river. This was a massive task. Frank Crowe planned to dig 4 tunnels. 2 tunnels would be on the Arizona side, 2 tunnels would be on the Nevada side. These tunnels would divert the water around the construction site. The tunnels were huge. Each was 56 feet in diameter. They were longer than a mile. Work on the tunnels started in late 1931. The men worked day and night. They worked in 3 shifts. The heat in the tunnels was intense. The air was thick with dust. The drilling machines roared. The men used dynamite to blast the rock. They shoveled the debris into trucks. It was dangerous work. Men died in rock slides. Men died from heat exhaustion. But the work continued. The men needed the money. They were paid about $4 a day. It was good money during the Depression. Living conditions were terrible at first. The families lived in a tent city. It was called Ragtown. It was near the canyon. There was no running water. There was no electricity. The sun baked the tents. The dust storms blew constantly. Disease spread in the camp. The company knew they had to do better. They built a new town. It was called Boulder City. It was 6 miles from the canyon. It had houses, schools, and stores. It was a clean place, but the company owned the town. They did not allow gambling or alcohol. It was a strict place. The high scalers were a special group of workers. Their job was to clear the canyon walls. They had to remove loose rock. They hung on ropes. They swung across the cliffs. They used jackhammers and dynamite. It was terrifying work. One slip meant death. They worked hundreds of feet in the air. They became famous for their bravery. They were like acrobats on a stage of stone. They faced the greatest danger. Safety was a concern, but standards were low. The heat was the silent killer. Men collapsed on the job. The company provided salt tablets. They set up water stations, but the heat was relentless. Another danger was the carbon monoxide in the tunnels. The trucks and machines produced fumes. The ventilation was poor. Men got sick. They called it tunnel cough. Some workers sued the company. They said the conditions were unsafe. The company settled the cases, but they denied the wrongdoing. By late 1932, the tunnels were ready. The river was ready to move. Frank Crowe prepared for a major turning point. On November 13, 1932, the workers began to close the cofferdams. These were barriers made of earth and rock. They pushed the water into the diversion tunnels. The river fought back. It rose against the barriers. But the men worked fast. They dumped rock and dirt into the stream. Slowly, the force of the water shifted. The Colorado River flowed into the tunnels for the first time. The riverbed in Black Canyon was dry. It was a miracle of engineering. The dry riverbed revealed the foundation, but the rock was covered in mud and debris. The men had to clean the bedrock. They used high-pressure water hoses. They washed away centuries of silt. They found cracks in the rock. They had to fill the cracks with grout. This process was called grouting. It created a solid base for the dam. It ensured the dam would not leak. The country watched the project. It was a symbol of hope. In the middle of the Depression, Americans saw men doing impossible things. They saw a river tamed. They saw a canyon transformed. It gave people pride. The dam was more than concrete and steel. It was a statement. It said that America could build its way out of trouble. It showed that human will could conquer nature. There were controversies, too. The workers tried to form a union. They wanted better safety and higher wages. In August 1931, they went on strike. They stopped work. Frank Crowe did not like unions. He brought in new workers. He refused to negotiate on the big issues. The strike lasted a week. The men went back to work. They had no choice. They needed the jobs. The union failed. The company kept control. The political climate also changed. Herbert Hoover lost the election in 1932. Franklin D. Roosevelt became president. The new administration was different. They supported the dam, but they changed the name. In 1933, Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes declared the name would be Boulder Dam. He did not like Herbert Hoover. He wanted to remove Hoover's name from the project. This caused confusion and anger. People argued over the name, but the concrete kept pouring. The dry riverbed was ready. The foundation was solid. Now the real work began. The workers had to build a wall. It had to be taller than any building in the world at that time. It had to be stronger than the river itself. The date was June 6, 1933. The first bucket of concrete was lowered into the canyon. It was a small start, but it was the beginning of a mountain. The scale of the construction was hard to believe. Frank Crow had a plan to pour concrete fast. He did not want to use cranes. They were too slow. He built a network of cables. Long steel cables stretched across the canyon from the Nevada side to the Arizona side. They carried huge buckets of concrete. Each bucket held 8 cubic yards of concrete. The buckets swung over the canyon floor. They looked like toys hanging from a string, but they were heavy. They moved day and night. The men called this system the skyhook. Pouring the concrete was a race against time. The dam was massive. It would contain 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete. That was enough to build a road from San Francisco to New York. But there was a problem. Concrete creates heat when it dries. It gets hot. If the workers poured the dam in one solid block, it would take 125 years to cool down. The heat would crack the concrete. The dam would fail. It would leak or break. The engineers had to find a solution. They invented a new method. They decided to pour the concrete in columns. They made blocks that were 50 feet square. They left gaps between the blocks. This allowed the air to cool the concrete. But this was not enough. They needed a faster way to remove the heat. They designed a cooling system inside the dam. It was a first in history. The workers installed a network of steel pipes. They placed the pipes inside the wet concrete. The pipes carried ice-cold water. The water came from the river. It circulated through the dam. It took the heat away. There were over 580 miles of pipes buried inside the concrete. A refrigeration plant on the Nevada side made the ice water. It was a giant ice box. The dam cooled down in months, not years. This technology was a breakthrough. It made the dam strong. It prevented cracks. The work was relentless. The men worked in 3 shifts. The noise was constant. The roar of the mixers filled the canyon. The puddlers worked on the ground. They spread the wet concrete. They used heavy shovels. They had to move fast. The concrete dried quickly. The work was backbreaking. The heat in the canyon bottom was intense. It was often 120 degrees. The rocks held the heat. The concrete generated more heat. Men collapsed from heat stroke. They were hauled up to the rim in buckets. They were taken to the hospital in Boulder City. Many returned to work the next day. They needed the money. Safety improved as the work went on. The company realized that injured workers slowed the project. They hired a safety supervisor. His name was William Rusty Robinson. He created new rules. He made the men wear hard hats. At first, the men did not like them. They said the hats were heavy. They said they were hot. But Robinson insisted. He bought hats made of leather and metal. They offered protection from falling rocks. He also issued safety lines. The death toll on the project was high. The official number was 96 men. Many died from falls. Some died from drowning. Others died from blasting accidents. It was a dangerous place. As the dam rose from the canyon floor, the river began to change. The diversion tunnels carried the water, but the dam grew higher. It started to block the view. It started to block the sun. The shadow of the dam stretched across the river. The structure was taking shape. It was an arch-gravity dam. It curved upstream. The water pushed against the curve. This pressure pushed the dam into the canyon walls. The walls of Black Canyon were made of volcanic rock. They were strong. They held the dam tight. While the dam rose, another battle happened below.
The workers had to build the powerhouses. These were the factories where the electricity would be made. They were located at the base of the dam. 4 intake towers rose from the water behind the dam. They looked like tall towers in a castle. Water would flow into these towers. It would rush down through huge steel pipes called penstocks. The force of the falling water would spin turbines. The turbines would create electricity.
The penstocks were huge steel pipes. They were 30 feet wide. A man could stand inside them. The steel came from the east. It was shipped by train. The workers had to weld the pipes together. The welding had to be perfect. A leak would be a disaster. The welders worked in the tunnels. The conditions were dangerous. Sparks flew everywhere. The heat was intense. They used X-ray machines to test the welds. It was new technology. They found mistakes. They fixed them. The quality of the work was high. The year 1935 approached. The deadline was near. The nation was still in the Depression. People were hungry for good news. The dam was a symbol of power. It was a symbol that America could work. The construction moved faster. Frank Crow pushed the men. He wanted to finish early. He wanted the bonus money. The contract said the dam had to be finished by March 1936. Crow aimed for 1935. A major turning point arrived in early 1935. The dam was high enough. It was time to close the gates. The river had flowed through the diversion tunnels for 2 years. The work in the riverbed was done. The tunnels were no longer needed. But one tunnel had a new job. It would hold the outlet pipes. The other tunnels were plugged with concrete. The closing of the gates changed everything. On February 1, 1935, the workers began to close the gates in the intake towers. The water stopped flowing through the diversion tunnels. The river started to rise behind the dam. It was a slow process. The Colorado River filled the canyon. It backed up for miles. It formed a lake. They named it Lake Mead. It was the largest man-made lake in the world. The water rose inch by inch. It pressed against the concrete. The dam held. It did not move. It did not leak.
But there was a hidden danger. The dam was built in a canyon. The walls were solid rock, but the rock had cracks. Water seeks the path of least resistance. The pressure of the lake was immense. The water tried to find a way around the dam. It tried to push under the foundation. The engineers knew this could happen. They built a grout curtain. They drilled holes deep into the rock under the dam. They pumped a mixture of cement and water into the holes. This filled the cracks. It made the rock waterproof. They used millions of gallons of grout. It was a dam within the rock. It ensured the structure would stand forever. The work on the powerhouses continued. The generators arrived. They were massive machines. General Electric and Westinghouse built them. They were shipped in pieces. They were assembled on site. These generators would provide power to the Southwest. The power lines were built. They stretched across the desert. They went to Los Angeles. They went to the mines in Arizona. The dam would bring the modern world to the desert. President Franklin D. Roosevelt came to see the dam. The date was September 30th, 1935. The dam was not fully finished. The powerhouses were not done, but the structure was complete. It was a major event. The president arrived by train. Thousands of people gathered. They stood on the rocks. They stood on the roads. It was 102 degrees in the shade, but the mood was happy. This was a victory.
Roosevelt spoke to the crowd. He stood on a platform overlooking the river. He praised the workers. He praised the engineers. He called the dam an engineering victory of the first order. He spoke about the future. He said the dam would bring life to the desert. He spoke about the benefits. He reminded the people that the government worked for them. He spoke to the nation listening on the radio. The naming controversy was still alive. Roosevelt referred to the structure as Boulder Dam. He did not use the name Hoover Dam. The crowd knew the history. They knew Herbert Hoover started the project, but Roosevelt's administration wanted the credit for the New Deal. The name would bounce back and forth for years. In 1947, Congress officially restored the name Hoover Dam. But on that day in 1935, it was a day of celebration for everyone. The worst of the Depression was over for many. The project ended officially in 1936. The last concrete was poured. The power plant went online. The lights in Los Angeles flickered with new power. The water flowed to the farms. The Imperial Valley was safe from floods. The cities had water to drink. The economy of the West was saved. The cost of the dam was huge. It cost $49 million. It was a fortune at the time. But it paid for itself. The sale of water and electricity paid back the government loans. The dam was an investment. It returned value for decades. There are lesser-known facts about the dam. The dam has no vegetable oil. The elevators in the dam use olive oil. It does not freeze in the cold temperatures deep inside the dam. The dam is a big clock. The clocks on the powerhouses are set to 2 different times. One side is Nevada time. The other side is Arizona time. Arizona does not use daylight saving time. Nevada does. The dam sits on the border. Time changes when you walk across the top. Another fact is about the dog. A dog named Nig lived at the dam. He belonged to the workers. He rode the skips and the elevator buckets. He watched the men work. He was a friend to the lonely men. He is buried near the dam. His grave is a small monument to the daily life of the worker. The Hoover Dam did more than hold water. It changed the map of the United States. Before the dam, the West was a gamble. The river decided if you ate or starved. After the dam, the people decided. They turned the water on and off. They used the power to build factories. They used the water to build cities. Las Vegas grew. Phoenix grew. Los Angeles grew. They all drank from the Colorado River. The dam stood as a wall against the darkness of the Depression. It showed that a nation could plan big. It showed that a government could build big. It proved that men could work together. Men from every state came to Black Canyon. They were hungry. They were poor. They left their mark on the stone. Their hands built the dam. Their sweat is in the concrete. They saved the American West. They tamed the wild beast. The river runs quietly now. It turns the turbines. It lights the cities. The dam stands silent and strong. It is a monument to a time when America refused to give up. It is a story of triumph in the face of despair. The water behind the wall is deep and blue. It reflects the sky. It reflects the promise kept.